Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very excited to welcome Matt Riggs to the podcast today to talk about Where's Poppa, starring George Segal and Ruth Gordon, and directed by the late, great Carl Reiner, released 50 years ago in theaters in 1970, November of 1970. How are we doing, Matt?
We're good. How are you, sir?
Doing well. Very excited to have you on this episode to talk about some really fantastic people. I mean, I was before, when the movie was just starting with the credits, and I was just like, wow, George Segal, Ruth Gordon, and Carl Reiner. This is a film I had not heard of before. Had you heard of this film before?
I had never heard of it until we talked about being on here. And not like you're saying the credits, I'm like, okay, I recognize some of these names. And then as the film moves on, you're like, wait, that? And then that, and then that, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah, something that's really fun when I watch like old movies I'm not very familiar with. Usually, they'll have like the main two or three people, and then they'll have that bit like that long list of credits. It'll say featuring or with, and it'll have like 15 names, and you will always recognize at least one name, right? Because it's at the beginning of their career, and we were more maybe familiar with them, later on. And that definitely happened here. We had Paul Sorvino. This was his first film. So, and then what was the actor from Saturday Night Live, Garrett Morris is in it.
And did you see Penny Marshall in the background?
No, but I read that online after I'd watched it. It said, oh, in the courtroom scene, because she was married to Rob Reiner at the time. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So we're going to get to the movie in a minute here. I just wanted to start by just asking you, kind of what is your background in movies? What role has movies played in your life since childhood to now?
A pretty big one. I grew up in rural Indiana, so we didn't have a lot of we had like the 5 channels. I didn't have cable until I was 14. So a lot of movies would be on, like, I probably ended up watching a lot of 70s movies because it was the mid 80s and that was what was on syndication. And then I had an aunt. Once the VCR magically showed up in our house, I had an aunt who recorded
the VCR.
Yes, the VCR. It was so. My dad bought a VCR to prove my mom a fact about Star Trek. So he spent like $1,300 to be like, "Here, I told you." So once she started recording stuff off of HBO and whatnot, we started watching more and more movies all the time. And then as I got a teenager, I was a teenager in the 90s.
Okay,
and that was like, oh, cool. We didn't talk about our age. I'm 41.
Okay, yeah, I'm 36.
Sweet. But that was, I got a car, I got to go to the video store, and that was right in the boon of, I think that's how you say that word, boon, whatever, of like the indie films. So I watched so many great indie movies in the 90s that I think sort of has affected my palate along the way.
Yeah, being a teenager in like the mid to late 90s and being, interested in movies, it was such an exciting time. 1999, considered by many one of the better years of film, right, in the last 30 years or whatever. So many like, unique visions and, great directors coming into their own. And so that time was really exciting. And then some years have been better than others. These last 20, this year has been a little weak since we haven't really had much.
They're holding stuff back. Since I met my wife, every year we do the Oscar movie marathon at the AMC movie theater.
Yep.
So I feel as though I'm a little snooty about movies now than I used to be. Like, I paid $70 to see 10 movies. I can judge them because I paid money. But it has been sad, but a few things have popped in here or there. I've not seen it yet, but I heard the Chicago 7 is fantastic.
I haven't seen that yet. I'm excited for David Fincher's new movie, Mank, story, the origin of Citizen Kane. Gary Oldman, right? I'm really excited for that. That's premiering on Netflix in early December. So
speaking of Fincher, you were talking about my movie past. I came of age, like college, right around the time. I always, even though it's a little problematic now, American Beauty, Fight Club, Office Space, and I feel like there's The Matrix, where it made, like, those were like the 4 movies that sort of formed me as like, well, maybe you don't need to do what's normal. You can kind of just choose your own path, which I've appreciated a good deal.
Yeah, those were all 1999. I still remember seeing Office Space opening night, and I would, like, my friend and I, we were like 2 of 5 people in the theater. Nobody was there. And I would tell people for weeks, like, oh my gosh, this movie's hilarious. It was like already out of theaters by March. And they were like, I was like, what is this movie? It's about an office worker. Like, who? And then now, right? It's like one of the most popular films that was released in 1999.
Such a
definitely one of the best comedies of that year for sure.
I agree.
So this podcast, at least for the near future, right? We're focusing on films of the 1970s, which is kind of an exciting decade for me because I've always liked films from the 1970s, but growing up in the 80s and 90s, I didn't grow up with these films, so I had to discover them later. So now with this project of actually going back and seeing, week to week different films from 50 years ago, it's been really exciting, kind of digging in and finding some treasures here. What films of the 70s have you really enjoyed throughout the years? Any that you've discovered later on that you like?
I recently watched, I believe this is the 70s. If it's not, I apologize. The Conversation.
Yeah.
Is that this? Yeah. I recently watched
1974.
That,
yeah.
And it's 70s slow. That's what I kind of refer to it. It's like back when movies were allowed to breathe.
You could breathe.
Yeah. And my wife and I were watching it, and we were like captivated but bored at the same time. It's like that kind of thing.
You're like, is this going somewhere? But I'm kind of intrigued.
Yeah. But there was a young man by the name of Bill Newby, which doesn't sound like a real name, who started introducing me to movies in middle school. And so I just, not until this podcast that I realized they were from the 70s. Like Rocky Horror Picture Show, he let me see. Blazing Saddles, he let me see. I mean, I was looking back at movies from the 70s and I was like, oh, wow. Like, obviously there's your Annie Halls and there's that sort of stuff, like the popular ones. But I would say, like, definitely having cassettes of Blazing Saddles and Rocky Horror in my house as a child or a teen, watching it with my mom was a very influential thing. I think those movies were fantastic.
Yeah, Blazing Saddles is so funny. 1974 is a crazy year. So not only do you get 2 Francis Ford Coppola movies that year, you get The Conversation and The Godfather Part 2 in the same year, both directed by Coppola. You also get both Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein by Mel Brooks in the same year, which is crazy to think, like 2 classic comedies that he made. And they came out in the same 12-month period.
That's like thinking back to the 60s with like the Beatles putting out 2 albums a year that are like, that go down as like iconic classics. Yeah. Who's absolutely. The guy? He's in The Conversation. He was in like 5 movies and they were all Oscar award nominees. I think he plays.
Oh yeah. The one in
maybe?
the one in The Conversation. The one that Meryl Streep had a relationship.
Yes.
John Cazale.
He died young, but he was only in movies that were nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah. So he was in. So between, what was the first one? Was it The Godfather? Like
Godfather.
Over the course of a few years, he appeared. Yeah. So he did Godfather 1, Godfather 2, The Conversation, Dog Day Afternoon, and
Deer Hunter, I believe.
The Deer Hunter.
Yeah.
So 5 films, all nominated for Best Picture.
That's nuts.
Which one? I'm trying to think. Godfather 1 and 2 both won, and then The Deer Hunter won. So 3 of the 5 also won Best Picture.
That's a good career.
I mean, that's, considering that, we lost him way too soon. He's such a great actor. I love him in Dog Day Afternoon.
Yep.
Like, he's so good in that. Like,
he's
the fact
Bo
that
Jackson
of acting. That's someone with no filler in his career. like that's someone who's like got a nice filmography, right? Most actors, you go to the beginning and you're like, the first 10 movies, you're like, well, you got to start somewhere. Sure. So that was really so yeah, John Cazale, and we'll definitely get to him soon. But for today, we are talking about Where's Poppa, released on November 10th of 1970. So I'm going to give a little bit of a plot summary, just very brief, and then I compiled like 5 or 6 little trivia, background information tidbits we can talk about. And if you have anything to add here, you can chime in. Sure. So because I had no idea what this movie was about until a few days ago. I just knew who was in it. So this stars George Segal as a lawyer named Gordon, who lives with his eccentric widowed mother, played by Ruth Gordon, which was kind of confusing. I'm like, really, of all character names, you have the same name as the last name of the mom, but okay. He promised his father on his deathbed that he would always care for her, but it's been really hard, especially after many full-time caregivers have quit because she's so difficult to deal with. The only person in his circle who helps at times is his brother Sidney, played by Ron Liebman. Is that how you say it? Liebman, I think?
I think so.
But then everything changes when Gordon meets a nurse named Louise, played by Trish Vandeveer, which results in love at first sight for both of them. Gordon has been fantasizing about killing his mother for a long while, as we all do, right? No. It's kind of like a disturbing like element of this movie,
Sure.
for it being a comedy, right? And now with Louise in his life, he starts to seriously contemplate doing something, right? Or at least putting her in a home, maybe being a little bit nicer about it.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the main gist I got from this movie. Is there anything I'm leaving out, like any other characters that we need to address?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I feel like that's the plot of the film, but the best parts of the film are not
Have nothing to
necessarily
do with
the
the plot.
Yeah. Yeah.
The parts that are just random and you're like, what's happening?
Yeah.
Which we'll get to, yeah. All right, so some background info on the movie. It was written by Robert Klein. It was based on his novel. This was his first screenplay. He went on to write Weekend at Bernie's and The Man with One Red Shoe, speaking of the 1980s and movies.
Okay.
He also co-wrote National Lampoon's European Vacation with John Hughes.
Ooh,
Something
okay.
tells me they wouldn't have worked on it together. They probably both wrote drafts and then they both got credited, right? He won an Emmy for working on Tracy Takes On in the 90s.
Oh.
And he earned a Writers Guild Award nomination for Best Comedy Adapted from Another Medium for Where's Poppa? This was like the only major nomination that year for Where's Poppa? This was Carl Reiner's third film as director. He previously directed Enter Laughing from 1967 and The Comic from 1969. Reiner won, and I didn't know this, he won 11 Primetime Emmys throughout his long career. He also won the DGA Life Achievement Award, a Grammy Award, the Mark Twain Prize, and 2 Writers Guild Awards. So he passed away earlier this year at the age of 98. So he was up until the last day, right? Like he was tweeting, he was active, and he had a really, amazing life, almost 100 years old when he passed away earlier this year. So this was his third feature film as a director. This was one of 3 films that George Segal appeared in during 1970. And I've seen the other 2 films. The other 2 are Loving and Owl and the Pussycat. Have you seen either of those?
I feel like I've heard of Owl and the Pussycat, but I have not seen either of those.
Yeah, it's a recent episode on the podcast. We talked about it just a few weeks ago, and it's George Segal and Barbara Streisand's a romantic comedy.
Okay.
So a little bit more of a box office hit than Where's Poppa, I would say. As I said before, this film marked the film debut of Paul Sorvino, who'd go on to do great work. I always think of Goodfellas when I think of Paul Sorvino.
Sure.
And him crying in the audience when his daughter won Best Supporting Actress. This is what I also think about when Mira Sorvino won for Mighty Aphrodite. And she
go ahead. Sorry.
And she says, I want to thank my dad who taught me everything I know about acting. And then it cuts to Paul Sorvino just like weeping in the audience. Something you don't see very often, right? You don't see people like weeping.
No, unless it's Michael Jordan. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So this was his first film. He's in it very briefly. As you said, Penny Marshall, who was married to Rob Reiner at the time, she can be seen sitting in the front row during the trial near the beginning of the movie. I wasn't looking for her, so I missed that. But you noticed it just watching it?
I did, because she's just right in the shot.
Okay.
She's like right in the shoulder of George Segal. I was like, is that Penny Marshall? Like she wasn't in the credits, and then she had no lines, so it makes sense. But
yeah, I think maybe I was just paying attention to the people in the foreground, like the main characters. I just wasn't looking for it. But yeah, that's kind of an interesting tidbit. So the film's original ending featured Gordon getting in bed with his mother and was considered too risque at the time, so they redid the ending. That was kind of a strange thing to read. Like I don't even know how the story goes in the last 10 minutes to make that work, but okay.
Was it because I've heard that's on the DV or that's on the VHS copy or something? I did.
Oh, like it's research. like there it's actually been released, like the alternate.
Yeah.
Ending? Oh,
on
cool.
the original VHS copy, and then I don't get the context. I don't know if did she leave the home and then he got in bed with her, or did he I don't know what was the plan when he got in bed. Was it just to calm her down, or was it going?
I want to think it was just to calm her down. I don't know. Yeah. So this was a weird thing I read. The film was re-released in 1975 under the title Going Ape.
Yeah.
Did you know of that?
I did not, but I saw. I'm like, how often does that happen?
Like 5 years on, they're like, this didn't really get discovered. Let's pretend it's something else. Call it something different. Like, how many movies have done that? I want to say very few, right?
Gotta be. I mean, other than like a foreign release, I don't see that happening
Yeah.
often. But did someone get more famous afterwards and they're like, we should re-release it or something like
I
that?
mean, George Segal was fairly well known in 1970. He had been Oscar nominated for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf a few years earlier, and he was in two big releases in 1970 before this came out. Um, November of 1970 was a busy month for him because he also had Al and the Pussycat that same month. So people would have known who he was. And then Ruth Gordon is coming off of a Best Supporting Actress Oscar win for Rosemary's Baby the year before.
Okay.
So we're not looking at like two unknowns that between 1970 and 1975 suddenly became famous.
Yeah, because I know like last year they re-released some, or that maybe they put out for the first time that some Mandy Moore like shark movie just because she got popular again.
Oh yeah. They would do that. I remember in like the 90s, early 2000s, if somebody got famous and they had a clunker in the beginning, they would it'd be on the shelf at Blockbuster or Hollywood Video, and it would just be like the image of the actor, right?
Yes.
Like Sandra Bullock, I remember she was in this terrible early movie called like Who Shot Pat? And she's in she's in it very briefly, but like the cover was just her face and Sandra Bullock, Who Shot Pat? So you go to the store, you see that, oh, Sandra Bullock has a new movie, and you rent it. And then you get home and you're like, what the hell is it?
That happened to me with, I think it's Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell had some. Yep.
There's some movie that came out before he was on SNL, and you're like, oh boy, this is horrible. Yeah.
Jim Carrey, I want to say 1991, like had one scene in a movie called High Strung. Three years before Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, and then that came out with his face on the cover. So people will rent it. They're like, oh my gosh, I've not seen this Jim Carrey movie. Let's rent it. And so you're watching it for like an hour and there's no Jim Carrey. You're like, what? You're like, okay.
Yep.
So yeah, I didn't read into it any deeper. I'd be very curious to know like what the strategy was behind re-releasing this movie 5 years later under a different title, which I feel like is kind of, deceiving audiences, and to that it's something new, and when it's not, I don't know, unless they recut it, maybe it's a different version, I don't know.
And if I was going to see a movie called Going Ape, and the amount of ape that is in the film, I would probably be disappointed.
Although you got to admit there is a lot of ape in this movie.
There's more ape than your common film, I'll say that for sure, Brian, but there's not enough ape to be called Going Ape.
Yeah, you wanted it to be like the second half, like just all in the ape costume. Just go for it. And then the last thing I looked up was that this was turned into a half-hour television pilot in 1979, and I guess it aired on ABC, but the series was not picked up. So that's kind of interesting. 9 years on, let's try Where's Poppa as a show. I don't even know how you turn this story into a series. I guess it would just be, the madcap, the crazy shenanigans with Gordon and his mom. Like I feel like that's how long is this movie? 80 minutes? Like it's very short. Like when it was over, I'm like, didn't I just start this?
Yeah.
So so those are my trivia notes on the movie. Did you look up anything else that you noticed about it?
That's about what I saw. While watching it, I did sort of see, I don't know if it was influential or not, but him like having those dream sequence fantasies and stuff.
Yeah.
Like I could see like where that would lead on to other stuff. So maybe it would have worked well for it. I mean, it did. It kind of reminded me of like a Dream On or something like that, where like they just used Dream On was more a classic film, but like even Simpsons or Family Guy, where they used the dream sequence as part of the format of the show. So maybe that could have worked as a TV show. Maybe we missed out and we had to watch MASH instead.
Yeah, maybe it was like too ahead of its time. Maybe if they'd waited another few years, maybe in the 80s, like they could have had a shot. I don't know.
Maybe if he used milk in the cereal instead of Pepsi or whatever it was, that was bothersome.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so that takes us to the movie. So what were you had never seen this before, right? So what was your take on this one?
Well, in full disclosure, I did watch it the Friday. I don't know when this goes out, but it was the Friday before they announced the election. So I was watching it streaming from my phone.
Okay, kind of like doing a bit of both.
Yes, but sadly, because I was streaming to my Apple TV, I couldn't go on my phone. So like 3 times I went to like check because my brain's just like, you need to know if they've called Georgia. So like so I kept like basically messing up the film and having to restart. But what I really liked about it was, like I said, everything but the plot. Like there were so many great individual scenes.
Totally in agreement with you. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. but the whole plot was a little slow. I thought George Segal kind of looked like Kurt Vonnegut a little bit. And it's also weird as a person. I think George Segal, for me, what my first foray into him was Just Shoot Me, I think.
Yep.
I don't remember much before that. So it's weird to me to watch him like that. Like you're used to him as being a different type of character. And I realize that's how acting works, but you know what I
mean. Yeah, it's funny, right? It's like my first film with him that he was in that I saw when I was younger was Look Who's Talking. He's like the antagonist in Look Who's Talking, right?
Okay.
Which came out in I think 89. So I saw him in that, and then Just Shoot Me, and then I'm a huge fan of the Goldberg. So I kind of think of George Segal in the later part of his career. And so when I finally caught up with He Was Afraid of Virginia Woolf a few years ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, like he's really young in this. And then I looked him up recently, and I mean, he was acting as early as like 1960. So he's had a very long career of about 60 years acting in film and television. And it's been kind of fun this year to really kind of discover some more of his work. His first film that came out earlier in 1970, Loving, is a very serious drama about divorce that is like absolutely spectacular. It's like this little movie that didn't really, make a big dent at the box office or critical acclaim very much, but it's actually a really strong film. And then he ends the year with these two kind of different kinds of comedies. One's more kind of traditional romantic comedy, and The Owl and the Pussycat, and then this is a more like, I don't even know how you describe this movie. It's kind of like almost like a surrealistic kind of it's a movie that's 80 minutes long, and yet it's never in a rush.
That is very true. It was it going back to 70s slow. There were times where it felt 70s slow.
Like I was, part of me was like, this could have almost been 45 minutes long. Like, there's not a whole lot going on here,
For sure. I mean, do you think this movie gets made without Carl Reiner? Like, do you think him as the guy from Dick Van Dyke and the Show of Shows and all that stuff got this movie made?
Yeah, it's interesting. So he had a short run of 3 films almost back to back. Enter Laughing, the comic, and this were made within about 3 years of each other. And then I looked him up, he has like this long stretch of like really not many films that he directed up until his long collaboration with Steve Martin, which lasted for 4 films between 79 and 84. So Where's Poppa was kind of like the end of theatrical feature films for him for a while. He might have had one in between this and The Jerk in 79, but very few other films he made in the 70s. So I'm assuming at the time this was not very well received, and it wasn't like, give us another film, Carl. But yeah, I think I agree with you. I think this movie gets made because of Carl Reiner. I don't know how successful his first 2 films were, but I actually caught up with his first film, Enter Laughing, a few months ago. It was on TCM when they did like a tribute to Carl Reiner when he passed away. It was really funny. It was really great. It had much more plot, it had more of a story. This one, it kind of felt like they had a 25-page screenplay.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, we got a few weeks to shoot this. We got George Segal, Ruth Gordon. How do we put this together? It felt to me like the first cut of maybe a better film. Like I felt like if there had been more editing, more stakes, a little bit more energy in the scenes. I mean, I wrote down in my notebook 3 times, like, needs more energy.
Yeah.
There's scenes that go on for like 7 minutes of like, and not a whole lot is happening. And so I'm same thing with you, is that the moments I appreciated were the more surrealistic scenes, the scenes that didn't really directly relate to the plot. Like all the stuff with the brother I thought was really funny. I almost wanted the movie to be about him at a certain point.
It took a weird turn. I don't know how much you want to get into the brother, like especially near the end, but when he got those flowers, like it was so funny how flattered he was by getting those flowers. And I don't want to give the movie away or whatever, but it was his interaction, like that whole stuff from him choking his own son to running through the park, like that was fantastic. Like I think you're right. That kind of needs its own film.
Yeah. So all that worked really well. Just the shot of him like walking up to the apartment, and he's just clearly naked. Like it's not hiding that. Like we're seeing him naked, and he's just like kind of like knocking on the door. Like he just had the scene, with like the hoodlums outside, and we don't really quite know what happened there. But then we see him, and he doesn't have any clothes on, and I'm like, I don't really know why this needs to be happening in terms of the story. But I'm like very satisfied by it because it's actually making me smile, making me laugh, rather than some of the more plot driven scenes where I didn't really care a lot about what was happening in the movie. I felt like we needed, a little bit more focus on the relationship between Gordon and his mom, because it always felt almost so fake to me that I couldn't really get involved in the story. I don't know.
Yeah. You didn't get enough. I mean, you saw glimpses of her basically becoming senile, was what was going on, but it wasn't enough to make, like, you didn't see enough from him, like, happening to him for him to act the way that he did, I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't know the age of your parents. My mother is in her late 60s, and she's got multiple sclerosis and is like lives by herself. And so there were some times where like I couldn't help but like pop myself into the story. It's like, well, what would my life be like if I had to live with my mom? And luckily she's self-sufficient and she's doing fine and very upset at the election anyway. But this, like, it's hard not to put yourself, because we all, for the most part, unless you were born in a test tube, you have a mom. So you can sort of put yourself into that shoe and how you would react. And there are probably days where you would give your brother 10 minutes to get there, or you will throw her out the window.
Yeah, I definitely can't relate to that. My mom is in her 60s and she's the greatest. And I've never considered, doing anything wrong. Yeah, my mom is great. And so I'm always like intrigued by these films that are about, son and, mother and son films where there's like a really, struggle of a relationship between them, whether it's a comedy or a drama. I'm always kind of drawn to those because I've never really had that with my mom. We get along really well. So in this film, I needed more.
For the record, can I say my mom and I also get along very well? I'm just saying. I did.
You put yourself. You put yourself in that situation. I didn't really love Ruth Gordon's performance in this. And I think part of it was the screenplay. I think kind of lets her down a little bit. I wanted her to be a little bit more of a three-dimensional character. Because the movie, and we're going to talk about later, the companion piece, for the double feature idea. Is also a mother-son comedy film, and I think it's just much stronger than this in terms of like that kind of intimacy between them, and having it be authentic. This film, it just felt kind of like a long kind of SNL sketch in some parts, and I never got the sense that Ruth Gordon was playing a real person. And George Segal was so strong in Loving earlier in the year, and then he's also very funny in The Owl and the Pussycat, and I felt like. And I don't know if it's Carl Reiner's direction or the script, or I just felt like there was something kind of off in a lot of the movie that prevented me from getting really involved in the comedy and in the story.
Yeah. Like I said, I feel as though I'm wondering if the script just was that short and they needed to add funny scenes into it. Like that whole courthouse scene is not really needed. Like other than you need him to be a lawyer at the end of the movie, I guess. But not only is Carl Reiner great in it, and apparently there's a word that he said for the first time in cinema history. I don't know if you saw that.
Which one?
Fact. I can't say it because you wanted me to not be dirty, but it starts with a C. It starts with a C. He yells it out in the courtroom, and apparently that's the first time it was ever said in cinema history.
Yeah. Yep, the C word.
The C word, not the British C word, but it involves an action. Anyway, but like the general or the military officer on the stand just constantly talking after the fact he shouldn't have been talking was hilarious. Like that was so funny, but it meant nothing to the movie.
And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you want to put on a comedy and it doesn't really matter what it's about. You just want to laugh. I think of like the slapstick, that kind of like the Naked Guns, where you don't really care about this, like the bad guy in the story. You just want to laugh.
I want to make sure that Frank gets with Elvis's ex-wife. And, no, I agree with you. But if the plot was stronger, then I think I would have been completely fine with it. Like they could have cut some of that or added. It was only 80 minutes long.
They couldn't cut anything, Matt. They couldn't cut anything.
Yeah, you could have easily added 10 more minutes to make his mom seem like unbearable more than she was. All that was just a given, I guess. Maybe that was a thing in the 70s. Maybe people hated their moms. I don't know for sure.
Maybe it's a matter of casting. I mean, I think of the 80s comedy Throw Mama from the Train, right? Where you have like the really, like that one captures like the angry mom that Danny DeVito and Billy Crystal want to push off the train. Like at the end of that movie, you're kind of on board with that idea. I never really hated Ruth Gordon's character in this movie. She just seemed kind of like out of it.
Yeah, maybe an inconvenience more than anything else.
I wasn't like rooting for George Segal, as Gordon to dispose of her. No. Another thing about the movie that was kind of odd was the love story. Did that Did you buy that? Like, it was just like
No.
they see each other and they're in love, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of Love at First Sight, but that seemed ridiculous.
I did like the shot of George Segal with like the knight in shining armor. I like that.
That was fun. Like those cutaways were very funny. The
Yeah.
whole making the mom stay in the bathroom or whatever there were parts of it that I did enjoy, but as I told my wife afterwards, I would never tell anyone to watch this movie.
No, I'm not gonna. So I mean, I don't want to just completely crap all over this movie, because we are, our subject today is Carl Reiner, who just passed away. I want to celebrate Carl Reiner and not just say, wow, what a horrible directing job, Carl.
Sorry,
but
yeah.
This might not have been one of his better directorial efforts. I mean, I looked at, I was like, does he have something better maybe in a year later, or but he doesn't really have anything until The Jerk. So that's a long time to wait to talk about Carl Reiner. That would be 9 years from now. So I did want to, talk about him and his work and the films that I do really love. But still on Where's Poppa? I asked all my guests, was there a theme to this movie? It's kind of hard with comedies to begin with, and then this movie, which obviously doesn't have a super long screenplay or plot. Was there anything that they were kind of going for? Like what kind of like a theme or something beyond just what happens in the movie? Or is it just kind of just for laughs? That's it.
I think it's a put upon man. Like that seems to be the theme. Who finally gets, like, after all these years of struggle, he finally like gets the girl. You think, or whatever?
Yeah.
I guess that's the theme. The theme is that everyone in the 70s needed a shower. Like I feel like it's just in these 70s movies, everyone just looks gross. Like that's just I don't know if that was on purpose or there was not quality air conditioning.
Don't run through Central Park late at night.
That's definitely a theme, unless you want to meet Garrett Morris. Like that's pretty fun.
Garrett Morris. I had something to say in this. And again, I love when I'm watching an older film I'm not familiar with, and then you're just watching it, and then there'll just be like a random scene with somebody that you know the work of. Sylvester Stallone, I think, has a couple like bit parts in early 70s movies. I'm sure I'll get to. All of that's always fun. You're like, or Jeff Goldblum, Annie Hall as like one shot. These it's like, okay. Sigourney Weaver at the end of Annie Hall, like she's not even in the scene; she's just like in the distance. I love all of these like little like cameo from people who would go on to have obviously a really important film careers. But yeah, I kind of agree. There's not a really strong theme in this movie. I was like, it's a theme like dump your mom in the nursing home. That's not very nice.
No, it's not nice, but it's a decision we've all got to make. Even you, Brian. I know your mama has a great relationship, but one day, no, I'm sure you'll love your mom to the end. But I don't know. And I do feel bad. You were saying you don't want to crap on Carl Reiner. There was enough funny in it that, like, weirdly enough, I think you take that plot and edit it down to like an hour, it would have been really good. Like I would have enjoyed if you would have been like, hey, there's this 1 hour. Carl Reiner did a 1 hour special on NBC on a random Thursday called Where's Poppa?
An hour show, like an hour long for TV.
It would have been great. Probably less use of the foul language.
I don't know if you could have shown. I don't think you could show the nudity.
I don't believe so.
Or the C word, right?
No, but there was more cussing in it than I expected. I don't really know the history of like when that sort of language got into films, but there was way more than
so brief history, and this actually George Segal is a part of this, right? So Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, that George Segal is in, and Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, that came out in 1966, and that movie had some language in it, and nothing really no F-bombs or anything like that, but like it was like a very controversial film at the time, and by like 1967, like there's more adult themes coming into movies, and so in 1968, that was the birth of the MPAA rating system, where now you can basically do whatever you want, but if you do everything, you get an X. Back then it was an X, and then there was X, R, PG, and G. PG might have been called something else in 68, but it soon became PG. So by 69, 70, you can basically say anything you want and have more nudity, adult themes, violence. They're still kind of trickling out. I've been watching 1970 movies all throughout this year, and there's some of them have some language, but a lot of them don't. A lot of them are pretty wholesome for like whatever it was rated. Like you look at Midnight Cowboy, which came out in 1969, and that won Best Picture. That was rated X, and I watched that a few months ago, and it would be like an R today, almost PG-13, like just like a very soft R.
Okay.
And it's kind of like crazy to think that that got an X. It's like, really? Okay. Yeah. So you don't hear a lot of language in a lot of these early films of the MPAA. And so to hear, that C word in the, and Where's Poppa? That it was the first time ever said in a movie, which is kind of crazy to think, and how far back movies go. But yeah, there were things about it wasn't it wasn't a terrible movie. It wasn't like I was sitting there in agony. It is only 80 minutes. I think if this movie had been 2 hours, I think it would have been kind of a rough sit. A recent episode on the podcast, Ryan's Daughter by David Lean, is 3.5 hours long, and it could have been 90 minutes. Yeah. Like not a whole lot. So that was tough.
I'm so glad. Oh, I'm not glad. I think all movies could cut out about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Except for this one, I guess. You either needed to cut 20 minutes or add 20 minutes to this film. Yeah. And I think it might have been better.
No, I made a note that said there is a good movie in here somewhere. It just needed it's weird. It needed to be cut down. Some of the stuff needed to be cut down from like 80 minutes to an hour. And then they needed to figure out a little bit more plot, a little bit more to get us more involved in the characters. I feel like they might have had to just go back and do a couple weeks of reshoots or something and give us, something has a little bit more energy. Because there were a couple parts in this movie where they're just like even just the first scene, he's just walking around the apartment getting ready. And there's no credits at this point. And I'm just like, okay, is something going to happen here? What's happening? So
it's very weird. Do you think they could have done if you were going to remake this film, show some back story of what Poppa was like that Poppa was a real person,
right? Yeah. So when the movie begins, right, so I don't know how long the dad has been dead, right, but he passed away. Was it recently? Because doesn't the mom ask where he is or something?
Yes.
What did I write down?
I think she's constantly asking.
Yeah, I think a remake of this, and that's actually the kind of the last question I asked each guest about the movies, looking at it through a 2020 lens of film released 50 years ago, what dates the movie, and if it were made today, what would be different about it? And I think you're right. I think one of the things that would be different today would be we'd maybe get to know the dad. We'd maybe have some flashbacks to the dad. And this movie is short enough. We could have, even just a couple scenes to the dad. If we, Carl Reiner had cast a really strong comedic actor in that role, maybe that would have given more context to the relationship.
Sure.
Yeah. Carl Reiner could have played himself. Obviously, we haven't even mentioned that Carl Reiner, an actor as well, and is in a lot of famous films, including Ocean's 11, and he could have been in this movie. I'm not sure if he's in his first 2 films. I feel like he doesn't act very much in the films he directs. He didn't direct too many movies. He made 11 or 12. He didn't make very many, but
one of them that I'm going to talk about later, he is in briefly. But
okay,
we'll talk about that then.
Yeah. But yeah, so I just think there was something there. I think any comedic film with these 2 strong actors playing mother and son, I think with a different script, maybe with tightening editing, getting it a little bit more focused, I think could have been a stronger film that I would have given more 7 or 8 out of 10. But as it stands now, it's a 3 or a 4. It it's not terrible, but I would not, recommend unless you're a diehard. I don't even know who would be a diehard fan of any of these 3 people. But if you're I want to watch every Carl Reiner movie, I guess you kind of have to see this one. And did you look at on IMDb? There are user reviews of 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10. Funniest movie I've ever seen. Hilarious. Forgotten gem. Amazing. Laughed all the way through. And I'm like, okay.
How many movies has that person seen if this is the funniest movie they've ever seen?
I'm funniest movie. I mean, one of them said one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. And I'm I really didn't laugh very much in this. I cracked a lot of smiles at some things. I laughed at some things with the brother. But even that, good. And he's a great actor. We've seen him in a lot of stuff. But there wasn't anything about the movie that I was I feel like at a certain point you need to have a strong story and something for us to kind of follow. Yeah. Even if it's stupid, like a Naked Gun, right? You need something kind of pushing us forward to get us to really laugh at the situations, movies like Bridesmaids and these movies that have these hilarious kind of set pieces, but has a story and a main character that we kind of care about throughout. Mm-hmm. I didn't really care about George Segal's character. He felt, he never really came to life as a 3-dimensional character that he does in Owl and the Pussycat and Loving. In this, he's just kind of like playing this weird kind of caricature of a person. Like I never really bought him as like a lawyer. Like I'm not like,
no,
like that didn't really feel natural. So I'm kind of like, I'd be really curious to know kind of like, what they like before shooting, like how did George Segal kind of prepare for this movie? I'd be very curious to know.
Yeah, it would be. I completely agree with you. I'm wondering. Pre-production would be very interesting to talk about because it seems like there should have been more of it.
Yeah, it goes back to that. My favorite quote by Gene Siskel, right? Is the movie itself more entertaining than a documentary of the same people having lunch?
No,
and,
I don't think.
And I feel like an hour and a half documentary of Carl Reiner and Ruth Gordon and George Segal like having a good chat at their lunch break. I almost feel like I'd rather watch that.
Yeah, behind the scenes would be
behind the scenes. I always feel like I've always thought that's a really good way to think about a movie. Like, is the movie better than if you could get these people together at lunch? Like, so I'm not sure this movie passed that test. Most of them do, but not this one so much.
No, I don't think so. Plus the little sprinkling in of character actors here or there. I would have liked to see them walk by while they're having lunch for sure. Like I just remember that the librarian from Ghostbusters is in the movie. Like,
oh my gosh!
But she's in it, and then
where I forgot.
Don't remember. She's in like the background of something.
Okay.
And then when he's interviewing the nurse candidates, the African American woman that walks in was on the TV show 227. I don't know if you ever watched 227. There was a very sassy neighbor that they had who was hilarious, kind of like their version of Sophia from the Golden Girls, and she was in this film, and I was like, I love that because that came out like 17 years beforehand. I appreciate you making me that sounds wrong. You asking me to watch this movie because I got to see all those people that I enjoy. So thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome. And I, for giving you I think the shortest film thus far on the podcast at 80 minutes, and it just ends. There is no ending to this movie. I try not to give away the last scene on the podcast just in case one of our listeners wants to check it out. So we won't give away the very last scene, but I'll say that when the car drives away, that's what I'll say. I'm like, that's it.
Yeah. I guess we're supposed to feel good about that.
How am I supposed to feel about this?
I don't know. It's just a chance to hear the theme song again.
Yeah.
It's a very weird theme song as well for the show.
Yeah, I've been enjoying the opening theme songs for a lot of these 1970s movies. There's some doozies. They're okay.
Yeah.
That I don't think this would go over well today. I mean, now you don't really have opening credits to movies, right? You just get right into it. I also the other thing about the movie was just again the relationship between Vanderveer and Segal just never comes to life. And then there's that scene towards the end where doesn't she say I'm leaving you, your mom is more important to you than I am, so I'm gonna leave. And then he's like, okay, I'll put her in a home, and she's like, oh great,
yeah, it's all fine.
And she completely changes in 5 seconds. I'm like I'm like, what? Okay. So that part of, I mean, I know it's a comedy, it's not a drama, we can go with it, but I'm like, really, you're just gonna change that quickly?
It turned very fast.
You are a character in a film. You shouldn't be. You should not change your mind this easily.
Well, she didn't want to fly back to Waukegan, Illinois, so that could be why.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, that actress, I do not know of her. I haven't seen her in anything else. I don't know if that relationship.
She married George C. Scott. That's what I found out.
Oh,
yeah. Because I thought she looked familiar, and I'm like, I want to see what else she was in, and then basically. She married George C. Scott in the same year as this, I think, or maybe 2 years later.
Okay.
And then didn't really do much.
And then she kind of retired from acting soon after this. She didn't do a lot. Oh, interesting.
Nothing.
Do you know if they stayed married? They're
I think they did until 99 or something.
Yeah, he passed away in 99, 2000.
Yeah, so probably that. Yeah.
Well, there you go. I mean, and 1970 is the year of Patton. That's the movie that won Best Picture that year, Best Director and Best Actor for George C. Scott, which is such a great movie. I hadn't seen it since high school. I watched it again March, April earlier this year. Really strong film. George C. Scott. A different league than Where's Poppa?
A little bit,
for sure. Although about twice as long. but worth it. I've always said a really good comedy. Should be about 90 minutes. If it's longer than 90 minutes, you got to earn it. It's got to, really work. And then with dramas, I'm usually good for 2 hours. And then if it's longer than 2 hours, you better keep me compelled. Right? So
I completely agree.
This movie passes that test. It's 80 minutes long. It's not going to take up your day.
Yeah.
You know. But I wanted to come on here and really rave because I had not heard of it before a few weeks ago. I love Carl Reiner. I wanted to say, oh, here's a forgotten gem. This is not that film, unfortunately. Enter Laughing, his first film from 1967, is much better.
Okay.
I would recommend our listeners find that. It was on TCM this last summer. I don't know if it's available on DVD or Blu-ray or if it's streaming anywhere. But Enter Laughing, really, really great comedy, and felt much more like a confident film for director Carl Reiner than this. Like this felt kind of like an early amateur effort from him, whereas the film he made before this he felt like he had much more confidence in his visual style, and the energy and pacing of the first film is better than this. So that was kind of interesting.
That's weird. I'm guessing you've not read the book. I'm wondering if the book of this movie is, because it was taken from a book. Like, I wonder if it's a good book. I mean, it got options, so maybe someone must have thought this will make a good book, but I don't think I can give myself the time to read it. Like, how long is it? Like a page and a half?
It must be very short, right? It must be like a novella, like 60 pages. No.
Yeah.
But so Robert Klein wrote the novel, and then he also wrote the screenplay. So I think the fault kind of has to lie with him a little bit, right? Because he's adapting his own novel.
Yeah.
So it might be a case where if somebody else had come aboard and adapted that story, turned it into much more of a film, I think Robert, Klein, maybe he was kind of being too particular with like keeping all of the elements of the book in the movie and not really thinking about like the visual elements that needed to be a part of it. I don't know.
I think Robert Klein writes what he knows, because I mean, if you think about it, he probably did have a go to his boss's weekend house where he died, and then they just threw a party and had a great time, and a woman made out with a dead guy. So I'm sure that happened. He just writes what he knows.
Which some of us do. And Weekend at Bernie's is funny. I haven't seen it in a long time.
Yeah, it kind of holds. I mean, it's problematic in our current world, but it's still funny.
Yeah, and where's Poppa? I don't know if you I thought some of it was problematic too, with the depictions of African Americans in this movie. I thought was kind of a little questionable. Like when the guy comes over and shines his shoes, and they're thugs in Central Park. I was like, okay, give us an African American character of substance here, Carl.
They kind of comment on it though a little bit. Like when the first time he gets robbed.
Yeah,
they sort of talk about, like, I felt as if it was making fun of the fact that this is what people think that they do.
What they think that
that's
do.
What people like us do. Like I think they said something to that effect. That second time that he got mugged, when he was in the costume or whatever, that was maybe the most problematic thing that I thought was. I don't know. I don't want to say the word. Are we allowed to say the R word?
Let's not.
Okay, so like that whole scene, like that was the one thing to me that was just like, ooh, like even though I did laugh at it, I was like, there's no way that they would joke about this now in a film. Like I just don't see that happening. And then the turn it made too, which was funny, there's just no way that would happen.
Yeah, it's an element in some of these these films from the early 70s, and you can do, I mean, with books written many, many years ago, and books that are still taught in high school and middle school that have some questionable things. We just talked about Al and the Pussycat, also starring Segal, and it opens one of the first scenes is Barbra Streisand coming into his apartment and basically being extremely homophobic to him for like a minute and a half, saying absolutely heinous things that you would never have in a movie today. Yeah. And I was telling my guest that, that put me out of the movie for a good half an hour. I didn't care about her. I was like, bye-bye. I'm not invested in this relationship. She's awful, So it's kind of strange. Like you have to kind of comment on it and you have to address it, but things were a little different 50 years ago. And, audiences accepted different things back then that we don't today. So that's just another element of looking at films released so many decades ago, things, a lot of things have gotten better, we do not accept that kind of talk now,
Yeah, which is good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anything else about Where's Poppa we wanted to touch on? As I said, my final question is always, looking at this film through a 2020 lens and how it would be different today. We kind of touched on that. We touched on how I think you're right. I think we would have a little bit more of Poppa in the new version. I just think the newer version would have more energy. I think it would, it'd really make the mom character even like more of a mess, and probably a really great character actress would play that. I just I thought of like what if like Catherine O'Hara played the mom or something, right? Like
sure.
somebody great, somebody who has really great comic timing. I love Ruth Gordon. She's great in Rosemary's Baby and Harold and Maude, but is she a great like comedic actress if she's not given the best material? I don't know if she quite had a handle on this character.
Yeah, I just don't think they gave her enough to do.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem. And
absolutely.
I mean, if I hadn't read the synopsis, if I just went into the film for the first 15, 20 minutes, I would have had no idea what's going on. Like, it's just this dude just lumbering around in the bathroom forever, listening to the radio, and then he gets in a gorilla costume, and I'm just like, what's going on? Like, there needed to be a reason for me. Like, if they just would have explained somehow what he was doing. Yeah.
Reiner, we love you, but you needed to guide us into this one a little bit better.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a Star Wars-esque scroll that let us know about the history of this woman and her decline.
Now, that would have been hilarious. I don't think it would have happened before the release of Star Wars.
No, I don't think so either.
But that would have been great. Like a very dramatic scroll for a movie like this, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's not a horrible film, but there's better films by Carl Reiner, which we will get to in a moment. So that takes us to our final two segments, the first of which is called the Divine Double Feature. That's where we pick a more modern film that either has like similar themes or similar kind of storyline that you think might make a really cool double feature with this movie. So you would watch Where's Poppa first, and it's 80 minutes, so we have time for one more.
Yeah, certainly.
Right? Ryan's daughter at 3.5 hours. That was a tough one to say, okay, now we're gonna watch another movie. This one, I think, and especially the kind of the way it ends, Where's Poppa just has like this almost non-ending. Like it doesn't really end. What would be a good kind of more modern contemporary film of the last 20 to 30 years that might be kind of fun to watch directly after, do you think?
Well, my first thought is just because the relationship between the mom and the son, like although it's in no way the same genre, is the remake of Psycho. I think would be fantastic. Because it's just, at least that one, maybe they explain the stakes more and whatnot. But the one I would like one, because I've done some back-to-back, again, seeing these Oscar movies and seeing films that are similar back-to-back. Like I saw The Martian back-to-back with The Revenant, and even though they're not the same movie, it's kind of like this guy's going through a thing and he needs to go through it. And I thought The Revenant did it very well, and The Martian, to me, didn't do it as well.
Okay.
So I would almost want to switch it up a little bit, but similar in more of the love story thing. I thought Her would be good with this. Because one, they kind of look alike. You still get the guy with the mustache and the hair.
He does kind of look like a young George Segal, doesn't he? Joaquin Phoenix and Her, yeah.
And then you get to, I think it tells a better story and it tells a better love story. So you get that part of it. And it's a more modern love story because it's with an AI.
Yeah, and Her is so much better that I think by the time Her is over, I don't think you'd be thinking very much about Where's Poppa by the end of that. So. No, yeah, that's a great choice. I only saw Her once. I saw it the weekend it came out, and I think about it sometimes. I definitely want to revisit it. Such a great film. The one I chose was more of the mother-son comedic aspect of it. So it's a little bit older. It's from 1996. Have you seen Mother? Directed by Albert Brooks. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Such a great movie. Debbie Reynolds plays the mom. He's like a frustrated writer. He's kind of lost, and so he goes back to live with his mom for a few weeks to kind of like see like why is he blocked in his writing? How can he kind of push through that? And I'm a huge Albert Brooks fan. My all-time favorite comedy is Defending Your Life. From 1991 with Meryl Streep is one of my favorite movies. I was
looking up to see if Modern Romance was a 70s movie because I love that movie so much.
Oh yeah, I want to say that's 81.
81, yeah.
So Albert Brooks, he doesn't have like a super long career in terms of like directing films. I think he's only made 7 or 8. There's Real Life, which is like a kind of a fun like kind of mockumentary he made in 79. Modern Romance of 81. I don't feel like that one's as well known as some of his others, but it's really, really funny, that movie. And then Lost in America. Have you seen Lost in America? It's so funny.
Not, no.
Oh, it's so good. It's 1985. It's him and what's her name? Julie Haggerty.
Okay.
Really great comedy. It's got like Gary Marshall is like amazing in it.
Okay.
And then like, and then he takes like 5-6 years between films. So the next one was Defending Your Life, which is just such a special movie. I saw it very young, and it's always been one of my kind of favorite comedies for sure. And then the next one he made, 1996, Mother, and that to me is doing what Where's Poppa is not, and that it's a very, very, very funny film about mother and son, but they always feel real. They feel like real people, authentic. The relationship feels lived in, like these are really mother and son. And it just tells like it's not really driven by plot. It's just kind of like a lot of scenes of them like going to the grocery store and like he she likes to save money and he's like, I'm gonna buy the most expensive jelly and deal with it, mom. And their banter is so great. Debbie Reynolds, one of her best performances for sure. So my pick would be Mother from 1996. You've never seen it. I haven't seen it in a long time. Lisa Kudrow is in it at the beginning. It's just a great comedy, and I would pair that one with Defending Your Life and Lost in America. If you want just a great night of comedy, go with Albert Brooks.
He's very talented. I love him so much. I feel like that was a Comedy Central type of movie where like I don't know if I've seen the whole thing, but I've probably seen parts of it when it was on between episodes of Kids in the Hall or whatever back in the day.
Yeah, and Mother is also an example of a comedy with a great ending where it doesn't just end like Where's Poppa, like how it ends, it leaves you kind of thinking about something. It's more than just the funny. Like it leaves you kind of thinking about, oh, like this is kind of something has happened between this mother and son, and there's been kind of an arc to both of their characters by the end. So yeah, it's a really, really great film.
Well, to find a comedy that ends well is impressive because a lot of comedies fall apart in the second act. So that's great.
Lost in America does not end very well. It's like one of the best comedies of all time for an hour, and then the last half hour, not so much.
Yeah.
Defending Your Life, I think, is great all the way through, and I think Mother is pretty much great all the way through. Nice. So yeah, check it out. And then our last segment is called Beyond the Flick. That's where we pick like a genre or a director or an actor affiliated with a movie, and we just kind of talk about their career a little bit. So since Carl Reiner passed away earlier this year, I think it was in June or July, at the age of 98, a long celebrated career. What films of his have you seen that he's directed? What other films? Do you have 2 or 3 favorites of Carl Reiner as a director?
I do. Can I just briefly throw in how much the Dick Van Dyke Show was awesome? Because that was also Carl Reiner, and he was great on it and great creating it and all that stuff. And all the stuff he did with Mel Brooks is fantastic as well. My favorite, it has to be The Jerk, is my number one. I mean, The Jerk is such a funny movie. The first line is, I grew up a poor black child with Steve. Like, it's so funny. But for me, I was going back to what I was talking about earlier with my aunt taping things off of HBO. She, on one cassette tape, she taped Dragnet, Mannequin, and Summer School.
Okay.
And I had that tape, and those became like my favorite movies because I had them in my house all the time. So Summer School, which Carl Reiner is in, he wins the lottery, and that's why Mark Harmon has to teach Summer School.
Okay, I haven't seen Summer School. Is it funny?
It's funny. You get a young Kirstie Alley before she does whatever she does. It's really good. Like that's, and maybe because I was a kid, I've honestly not watched it since then, so I don't know for sure. But it's about these kids who are clearly not the brightest kids in school, and the teacher who is the gym teacher who clearly should not be teaching summer school. And they just come together, and I think it's a great movie. It's very funny. It's got a good plot. I enjoy it a good deal. Yeah.
So Summer School. Wait, what's it called again?
Summer School.
Summer School. Didn't he direct a John Candy movie too? I think I looked at
Summer Rental.
Okay. I was like, okay, so 2 summer movies. Okay. Summer Rental, John Candy, which I don't think I've seen all the way through, but I watched. There's some funny stuff with him on the beach. I want to say there was like a really good scene. I have to check that out. I'm not super familiar with his later work. He did Fatal Instinct, I want to say, like a spoof movie in like 93.
Okay.
Which with like Sean Young, like spoofing Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct.
That's rough. Those movies were rough.
And then
all those spoofs were rough. Sorry, I hate them.
I don't think I've maybe seen a scene or 2 from it. And then his last feature film as director was That Old Feeling, which is disappointing, which is a movie I haven't seen, but I haven't heard good things. Came out in 97 with Bette Midler and Dennis Farina. So he didn't end strong.
Yeah. I just got excited. We were talking about Dennis Farina earlier today.
Oh, okay.
So like apparently my mother-in-law's got hit on by this cop who used to be Dennis Farina's partner. So then Dennis Farina like basically just ripped off his character in the TV show and was like, oh wait, that's totally the guy that hit on me. Like we were literally talking about Dennis Farina earlier today.
So your favorites would be The Jerk and Summer School. Those would be your two.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I was like kind of embarrassed by this, but I'm like, really, the films of his that I love are the ones starring Steve Martin. Yeah. Like, really, that's it. Like, you know, his early work. And I would put, you know, honorary mention, I would put Enter Laughing. I think that one's really funny. His very first film from 1967. But yeah, so my third favorite would be The Man with Two Brains. Have you seen that?
I've not. I should.
It's like, it's really, I mean, it's pretty out there. It's pretty out there, but it's Steve Martin at his best, kind of a madcap, kind of scientist comedy, you know, kind of like a little bit more for adults, like, you know, not the Nutty Professor or, you know, that Disney one, or what was it? The Flubber.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of comedy, but for a little bit older audience. Kathleen Turner is great in it. She's like a kind of the antagonist in the movie. She's great. So that'd be my third favorite. That was 83, I want to say. And then my second favorite would be The Jerk, which is a great comedy. I haven't seen it in a long time. Bernadette Peters is great in it. You know, the very first starring role for Steve Martin. What a great first movie for him, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like he had been, you know, by 79, he was a name. He was on SNL. He was, you know, doing his comedy concerts, and you know, people knew of him by 79. So I think it was important for Steve Martin to come on the movie scene with something really strong, and he got that with The Jerk for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. So any idea what my favorite is?
I mean, there's like two left. Yeah. So I gotta go. What is it? The one with the plaid?
Nope. That one I don't like that much. I mean, it's okay. It's kind of fun what they're doing, poking fun at the old, you know, film noirs of the 30s and 40s and that. Not really that funny though. It felt more kind of like an exercise in comedy, you know, than anything else. Yeah, my favorite Carl Reiner movie is All of Me with Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin. I've seen it 2 or 3 times. It always makes me laugh. I think Steve Martin was deserving of an Oscar nomination for that performance. He's so hilarious in All of Me as like being half himself, half him, half Lily Tomlin for like half of the running time. That scene where he's like trying to get across the sidewalk and like she's like pulling him back towards the street, but it's all him, right? I mean, we're only hearing Lily Tomlin. Like it's really all Steve Martin. So I mean, I would say that's more of like an amazing vehicle for Steve Martin than it is a great directorial effort by Carl Reiner. But that was their 4th and final feature film they did together. And I felt like, you know, everything that kind of went well in those first 3 films, it all comes together in All of Me. It's a great story. There's really great chemistry, you know, the little bit that they're in together, not very much, right? But Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin, if you have not seen All of Me from 1984, I didn't discover it until high school, but I laughed my ass off in that movie. It's great. It's definitely worth a look.
I know I watched it as a child, but I've not. I actually mentioned it to my wife because of this podcast to watch it last night, and we just ended up not doing it. I would be remiss if everyone has their own opinions, and if All of Me is your favorite, that's great. But the scene I'm going to try to sell you on The Jerk. The scene in The Jerk where Bernadette Peters is asleep, and Steve Martin is explaining how many days it feels like that he's known her is maybe the funniest scene on cinema. I love it so much. I don't know how she got through it without earplugs or something, because he's just rambling on about these nonsensical days and how it felt like in days. If you've not seen it, please go watch The Jerk. It's so funny.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, they're pretty close. I would put like Man with Two Brains a little bit farther down, and then it's like The Jerk and All of Me are really close up top. Those are
I'm going to rewatch All of Me though, because I want to. I think I would enjoy it. We all need a laugh.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you haven't seen them before, check out The Jerk and All of Me. Great films directed by Mr. Carl Reiner, late great Carl Reiner. All right, thank you so much for being on the show, Matt. Do you have anything you want to promote? Anything? How do we find you online? Things like that.
I am on Twitter at the Matt Riggs, and I do a weekly podcast called 30 Characters, where me and my friends Joe and Andy and a guest, once a month we have a long episode where we basically improvise until 30 characters stop by, and the rest of the Fridays of the month we kind of dig down towards like a character per week.
Oh,
So
that's an interesting idea. I love that.
yeah.
I'm gonna check that out. What's it called again?
It's called 30 Characters.
30 Characters. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, let's all check that out and support
Please.
your podcast.
For sure.
All right, thanks.
Thank
So
you.
thanks again, Matt. Thanks to everybody for listening. This has been a lot of fun. Please give the podcast a 5-star rating and a review, and tell your friends and family about us. You can email film at 50 at 50 years ago in film at gmail.com. And you can find us online on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and film at 50.com. There's also a Patreon page to support 2 to 3 bonus episodes every month, creating all sorts of really cool exclusive content. So I'd love for you to check that out as well for Film at 50. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.